Hello and welcome to Hey, I Loved That Movie, the podcast where we rewatch the films we loved when we were younger to see if they still hold up. I'm Dan,
I'm Michael.
I'm Helena.
and for this episode we have special guest, author of the Hunted series, it's Gabriel Bergmoser.
Hi, I'm Gabe, and today we're talking about The Prince of Egypt.
So was this a childhood classic for you?
Very, very much. But there's a few things I want to say about The Prince of Egypt, but before I do that, I'm really curious to know, had you guys seen the movie before? And if so, slash if not, what did you guys think of it?
I had not seen it. It was fine. Yeah.
I mean, my heart's bleeding just a little bit right now, but
I'm fairly sure I saw it when I was a kid, but I think my parents decided it was a little bit too religious.
cool. That's cool.
And I didn't like it because it didn't have any princesses in it, and
Reasonable.
Disney kind of had the very, very much. I had a type of film I enjoyed, and it mostly revolved around princesses and princes, especially. Didn't even get married. Oh, we did get married, but anyway, she's not a princess. Didn't interest me at all.
I had seen it when I was a kid a couple times, and I remember it as a kid. But I think for me, it fell into that category as when I was a kid because it was like animated to me. It's akin to a cartoon. It's a fun film for kids. It wasn't. I fell into the same trap with Watership Down, where you're like, "Oh, watch this! It's animated." I didn't appreciate it as a kid because I was a child. I was like a very small child when I saw it, and you probably shouldn't have. Now watching it back, but like now I appreciate it a lot more as like a film and as like from an era of animation that was kind of, as we have discussed before on this podcast, a mess. It's nice that something very, very like artistically driven came out of it.
It's interesting kind of hearing all this because, Helena, like you, I think I had a type as well as a kid. And it turned out that my type was films in which vast amounts of infants are fed to crocodiles, because this film was 100% my type. And, it's funny. This is where I make a bit of a confession to you guys, because when Dan reached out to me and was like, "Do you want to jump on the show?" I was like, "Yes, I do." And I was thinking, okay, well, what's a film that I loved when I was younger and don't periodically revisit, or a film that's kind of like, descended into the annals of nostalgia, but hasn't necessarily been something that's been like a mainstay of, I guess, my cinematic revisitation schedule of late. And I really couldn't think of anything because, anybody who knows me or sort of knows my work or anything probably is aware of two things, which is that A, I'm incredibly obsessive, and B, I'm incredibly nostalgic. So basically anything that I loved as a kid, you can probably bet I'm going to watch a lot as an adult. So the few films I could think of that I loved when I was younger, but I hadn't revisited in years, I was like, well, are they going to be that interesting to talk about? Like, really? And then I just kind of felt myself veering towards The Prince of Egypt. And I was like, I'm going to cheat slightly and suggest The Prince of Egypt. And it's a cheat because I rewatched this film a lot, but it was something that I saw when it came out at the movies. I think I saw it about 2 or 3 times at the movies, and it just completely blew my mind. Like 1998, we're talking, I would have been 7 years old, and I had never seen anything like this before. So, I was like all kids growing up in the 90s, I was used to Disney stuff or whatever else, but I don't think I'd yet seen anything at a cinema that I guess set my imagination on fire the way that this film did. Because straight away, like from the opening scene, you got the vistas of Egypt and the dust and sand blowing across all of it, and those first like booming wails of "Deliver Us," and you're just like, wait, what is this? Like, and I showed it to a friend the other night, and she was like, "This is not a children's movie." And I was like, "No, this is not a children's movie." And
Definitely not.
I watched it as a child, and I was just so enraptured by this film. And I remember walking out of it, and I was not from a religious family. I'm not a religious person now. But I remember walking out and saying to my dad, "So Dad, it said at the start that it was taken from the book of Exodus, so there's a book. Can I read the book?" And Dad's like, he's like, "Well, I mean, I guess if you want to." So he goes and he buys me a Bible. And, I didn't really make any association for what this was. I was just kind of like, "Oh yeah, cool, that's the book that the story's from." And so I flicked through it until I find the story of Moses. And I was like, the film's a lot better than this. Because, like, as you know, if you read the Bible, like, it's very, it's very allegorical, and it's very kind of like, Moses went unto Pharaoh and spake unto him, "Let my people go," etc., etc. Whereas what I love about this film is that it takes effectively the broadly sketched outline of the story that you get in the book of Exodus, and it fills it in with living, breathing characters and emotion and pain and pathos and heart. And the thing I always kind of come back to was my first week at film school. I remember we were going to a lecture where they were talking about the essence of storytelling and the essence of conflict in cinema. And this lecturer, who was this like, stodgy old man, he was going on about all kinds of like film theories and stuff that I was trying to pretend to be interested in, but were kind of flying over my head. Or maybe a better way to put it is trying to pretend to be smart enough to understand it. And then he says to the group, the best example of conflict I've ever seen in any film, or the best and purest and most effective example of conflict I've ever seen, is The Prince of Egypt. To which I sat up and I was like, wait, what? Please tell me more. And he explained it really beautifully, where he said, what you've effectively got is the story of these two brothers who've grown up loving each other. One is the second born, and he doesn't have really any responsibilities. He can effectively just be a playboy for his whole life. And the older one is being told time and time again, he's destined to be the pharaoh. He's destined to be the morning and the evening star. And the one thing he cannot be is the weak link. There's that great line where Seti says to him at the start, one weak link can break the chain of a mighty dynasty. And so Ramses' whole thing is that I can't be the weak link. I can't be the weak link. And then due to circumstances completely outside of either of their control, they're driven apart. Moses finds out that he's in fact one of the Hebrews who have been enslaved and basically massacred by the Egyptians. He heads out to the desert. He stays out there. He basically runs away from his responsibilities. He lives this kind of quiet provincial life as a shepherd. And then, as anybody who has a passing familiarity with the Bible or this film knows, God comes to him in the form of a burning bush and says, you have to return to Egypt and let your people go, which brings him back into conflict with his brother, who is now the Pharaoh. And it's in that second half of the film that I find it so emotionally engaging as a drama, because it is ultimately a story of these two brothers who never stop loving each other. There's still so much warmth and heart and connection between them through the whole back half of the film. And the thing is, you feel for Ramesses. Like, obviously, he's the antagonist. Obviously, he's, party to slavery. He's threatening to commit another genocide at the end. But because of the way he's been set up from the start, you completely understand why he doesn't think there's anything wrong with that, why he thinks this is okay, because that's the world he's been brought up in. He's been surrounded by all of this pressure of, this is what the Pharaoh does, this is what your role is, and this is what the role of the Hebrews are. And you see that great subtle shot where Moses first comes back to Egypt and they're standing in the palace. In the background, you can see the big statue of Seti, his father, which you saw in the early scenes, but then there's like an even bigger statue of Ramesses, like dwarfing him. And you realize the whole thing is that Ramesses is like, I have to be bigger than my father, I have to be better than my father, I have to be this, I have to be this, I have to be this, I have to be this. And Moses coming to him and being like, I'm pleading with you to let these people go or it's all going to get worse. And Ramesses just cannot hear that. He cannot hear that because it would be at odds with everything his whole identity is built around. And it is so beautifully tragic because the way that it goes kind of can't go any other way. And even by the end of it, where you get that final moment of Ramses on the rock kind of screaming out Moses, you still kind of feel for him. And I remember as a kid feeling for him and being like, this isn't what I'm used to. Like, I'm used to watching films where the villains are purely irredeemable. They are purely just like monsters and they get their just desserts and everything's happy. But it's not like that in this film. You get to the end and Ramses on the rock and you have Moses looking across the water and you can see that he's still in pain, but he's like, I have to turn away from it and I have to, lead my people and fulfill my duty now and turn to my new family. But it's such a bittersweet, melancholic ending, even though he's achieved what he set out to achieve. And I love that this film lets you sit in the discomfort of all of that stuff, because so many children's movies, so many, children's animated movies from this era would not have gone near it. So, to me, this is a film that blew my mind as a kid, that was absolutely one of my favorites, that probably changed my understanding of what stories could be. And it's something that every couple of years when I revisit it, I am still wowed by the fact that this was something that was allowed to be made.
Thank you for that. No, I think the last thing you said there, the whole you shocked it was allowed to be made. That was the only thing I was thinking about whilst I was watching it. I was fully paying attention to the story, and it is an amazing story. A weird medium to choose is animation from a marketing standpoint. You would expect to go into it thinking, oh, this is a film for children. It's a simplified. I went into it thinking it's probably a simplified version of the story of Moses, and it's not. It's very complex and a pretty close retelling, whilst adding a ton of character to the story, because this film kind of bombed. It didn't make much money when it came out, I think, and it's kind of like, yeah, well, no other film at the time came out was like this. Since then, no one has really made an animated film about something like this.
You got Joseph, King of Dreams.
Well, that was
Sequel or prequel, rather.
the
Was it?
prequel,
Yeah.
because of course this film also got a straight to video prequel, because
Yes,
literally
because
every
it was the
film
90s, and that's what they did.
yeah, like it is a very complicated film, and it's strange that it comes out. And Prince of Egypt kind of stands alone in sort of film history as like, they did this, and it's complex and it's difficult, and then it's an animation, and whether it's an animation because that's the only way they could make it and keep it what they wanted, maybe because it was experimental CGI traditional animation mix, which historically didn't go well, and they kind of stopped doing it across the board. This is maybe one of the few films that did it really well and successfully. Yeah, I think I think the point you made of it's amazing that they got this film made, and they made it, is really interesting.
I feel like in some ways, it's the question of the medium is really interesting because, God, it must have been 5 or 6 years ago now when they released the what was it, the Ridley Scott movie, Exodus: Gods and Kings. And one of my mates and I, he also grew up in the Prince of Egypt. We were really excited for this because we were thinking, oh, awesome! It's like a live action Prince of Egypt. How good's that going to be? And I think we got through like 20 minutes of it, and we were like, this is terrible. And that I guess that kind of got me thinking about about the medium and about the choice of medium for this, because you're right, it's a very, very dark story. It doesn't pull its punches. You see a lot of children die in this film.
Like a lot
And-
of children.
Where the
lot
kid
of-
drops
Like a
the
lot of
pot.
kids.
Yeah.
The kid
Yep.
drops the pot on it, and the arm, you hear the pot drop, like smash, and
Yep.
the arm just flop out dead.
Yeah.
I knew the
And I
story
mean,
of Moses more than I knew like the story of like the Prince of Egypt film. Like I went to Christian schools growing up, so I knew about Moses, Red Sea, Ten Commandments, all of that. And I don't know if we were ever shown this film as like an example or not, because the people
Probably
in
weren't
charge of
allowed.
my RE were like very, very fundamentalist. So I'm not sure
Right.
what they'd have thought of this film, if they thought it was great or if they'd have thought it was,
Too much character. They added
yeah.
too much to the Bible.
But it's funny because the changes it chooses to make are not to soften like really much of anything. I mean, yeah, there's some like, if they were to continue and tell more of the story about, like, I get from what I vaguely remember what happens after, they spend the 40 years wandering the desert or whatever it is, and then a whole bunch of messed up stuff happens. Like, yeah, okay, that might be harder to get away with, but even as it stands, maybe this gets away with stuff because it's more supernatural stuff inflicting this pain than it is humans doing it to each other, which I guess is what kind of happens later in this story. But, the other thing I wonder is because, here in Australia, I don't know what you guys have over there, but when it comes to like the rating system of movies, The Prince of Egypt is rated G, which is like for general exhibition, the children's films, like anybody can watch them. And coming back to what you said before, Michael, about like watching it and being like, I don't think I should have seen this as a kid. I don't necessarily know that really small children should watch this film. I mean, I guess I must have been 7 when I saw it, 6 or 7. And I feel like by any estimation, that was probably slightly too young, but I didn't care because I don't know if I'd been older, maybe it wouldn't have had the impact it had on me because, I would have started watching darker things anyway. But coming back to the medium just for a second, did you guys see, so I'm going to go on a very slight tangent here, but did you guys see the Netflix live action Cowboy Bebop adaptation?
Yes, I did actually. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really an anime fan, so I actually quite enjoyed it because I've not seen the anime. but-
Interesting.
yeah.
A lot of people say that if they're not really in love with the original. Now, I'm extremely in love with the original, and I was an ardent defender of the live action remake up until I saw it, because a lot of my friends who love the original were like, oh, no, it's going to be terrible, look, the trailers suck, and it looks bad, and it looks cheap, and it's this, and it's this, and it's this, and it's this, and I love Cowboy Bebop so much that I was just like, no, I just want more. And I'm not somebody who is a massive hardcore stickler for accuracy and adaptation. Like, I would rather a new voice comes in and stays true to the spirit of the original, but does something, finds new notes to play. It doesn't just kind of like try to very meticulously follow the original, because there's a reason that The Prisoner of Azkaban is the best Harry Potter film, right? So I was sort of thinking, no, I don't mind if it's not like, completely true to the letter or everything about the look of the original, But then I saw it and I was like, oh God, you just fucked it up on every possible level. Like you desperately wanted to evoke some of the most iconic images of the original, but you also wanted to change so much of the plot that what you get is this really contrived mismatch where none of the characters act like they're supposed to act. It doesn't look, move, or feel like it's supposed to feel, but then the original songs and shots that you have included feel so out of place because they've come from the stylized, heightened world of anime, and you're trying to put them in live action where you've attempted to temper everything else to make it a bit less, or I guess to tone it down a bit to make it fit live action more, except for these certain things. So when they happen, they stand out like a sore thumb. And I just think everything about that show was terribly calibrated, but it really got me thinking about how for some stories animation is just the best medium. And you know, in something like Bebop or in anime, you have the ability to, you know, to have human beings moving in ways that they wouldn't move otherwise, to have people reacting and behaving in ways they wouldn't do otherwise because it's heightened. You know, it's like opera where everything's kind of like amped up, everything's a bit over the top, everything's a bit extreme, and there's sort of this like, I guess, this tacit agreement with the audience that this isn't supposed to be realistic and that's okay. And that's why I think animation is such a great medium for The Prince of Egypt, because right from the opening shot, the film looks like a painting. Like, you know, the backdrops and the way everything appears, it is so strikingly beautiful and so composed, and it has that really unique visual style where it's merging CGI animation with traditional hand-drawn animation and with backdrops that clearly are like hand-done paintings, but then, you know, effects like the water parting and everything, then the more traditional animation of the characters in the foreground, and even they have like this slightly heightened kind of almost like hieroglyphic statue kind of look to them. And to me, all of that works in concert to make you buy into the film. I mean, I think the failure of the live action version, or versions, there's been a few of them, and I don't think any of them have been that well received apart from maybe the Charlton Heston one in the 50s. But all of those, it's like you almost, I guess it's just easier to suspend your disbelief, and it's easier to buy into a heightened story and into heightened emotions and into something that is as huge and in your face and dark and epic and extreme as this, when it's done in that animated style that gives it almost the, I guess, the veneer of myth, or like I said before, of opera. And I can't believe I'm saying all of this about a 90s children's cartoon, but I really think in the case of The Prince of Egypt, it's valid because it's not a children's cartoon. So how else do you classify it? Like it was marketed as a children's cartoon. It has like tiny little concessions like, you know, Hotep and Ahoy, the priests, and like little things that kind of gesture towards like, you know, the Disney comic relief of the era. But apart from that, it really doesn't veer into that territory at all. And I feel like I think it's such a deeply felt film where clearly the people making it were so passionate about it, but they knew that the only way they were going to get to tell the story in this way was to position it as a children's animated film. And that maybe is what kind of damned it a little bit, because it came out in that era where people were sort of, you know, expecting a very different thing and they got this instead. But then if you made this film for adults, it never would have gotten the budget that was needed for it to be made on this scale. So I feel like there's this weird kind of catch-22 thing going on with this film, which means that in some ways it's become this like forgotten thing where the people who grew up with it, or a lot of the people who grew up with it, absolutely adore it. But so many people didn't catch it growing up, and it doesn't really have that like seminal childhood staple thing of like a Lion King or a Mulan or any like, you know, Disney animation you care to name. And I think that's a massive shame on the one hand, but on the other hand, I love it because it kind of just adds to this like, you know, sort of little feeling I have that I'm like, but this is mine, you know? This is like my little like, you know, favorite beloved cult film, you know?
The more you talk about it, the more I'm sort of trying to like this film, because I wasn't particularly thrilled watching it. It really brings back a lot of not trauma, but like I was very much a non-Christian in quite a Christian environment growing up. So like my parents were very worried about, basically there was like, you know, I don't know if you have them, like Girl Scouts and brownies and cubs and that in Australia.
Yeah, we do.
Brownie, like it's traditionally faintly religious. The sect in my area was run by these like real hardcore fundamentalists, evolution is a myth kind of people. So my parents were like, no, you cannot join brownies. And I wasn't allowed to go to, like, they ran a lunchtime club at school and I wasn't allowed to go to that and things like that. So I was always torn between knowing in my heart that I didn't believe in God when everyone else around me seemed to, but also really wanting to, and really wanting to be part of this, because they did fun things. Like, they very much lured children in with like fun activities to then sort of indoctrinate them. And I had a similar experience where I went to like this it was this weird evangelist thing that used to set up literally down the road from me growing up, and it was there every year. And my parents would never let me go until one day when I was like 13. I was like, no, mum, I'm old enough to decide for myself. I'm going to go. So I took my like one Christian friend that I had, and I was like, we're going to go to this. And it started off really sort of similarly to this film. It was like, it was all fun and games, very much like the start where they're chasing each other on the chariots. And then it got sort of darker and darker until it sort of started, they had like a Christian rock band that were playing, who then sort of started singing some quite sad ballads. And then they sat us all down and we had to talk about, told us about how Jesus died, and they didn't hold back. And much the same way this film doesn't hold back, they really, really went for it. And it was like describing how much pain he was in, how agonizing it is to be crucified, like how the blood was running down his legs, how he was stuck with a sword to prove that he was dead. I was 13, but there were kids that were like 4 or 5 in the audience there crying. And it sort of struck me as like, in these sort of stories, they don't hold back, and it brings about this Christian guilt and fear that is actually a big part of the religion. I mean, obviously everyone's experience is different, but that's how I sort of experienced it growing up. And this film's really brought back some of that.
Yeah.
That sly kind of like, you're going to believe, because if you don't, then you're technically on the other side and your firstborn's going to get killed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting read on it that I guess I hadn't really thought about it before, because I didn't like, I don't know, like I didn't have like a super religious upbringing. Like, I moved schools a lot when I was younger because my parents moved around a lot. And the school I was in when I first saw this was, just a very secular public school. But then I went to quite a religious school for my next few years. But it was religious, but it wasn't like that kind of religious. It wasn't the, Jesus died for your sins and you'd better believe or else. But I guess, it's funny because you watch those films like Jesus Camp or something, and you see the ways in which, like, particularly in America, like, fundamentalist Christians do manipulate kids by effectively traumatizing them, being like, Jesus went through all of this and this and this and this and this. And it's that really, I don't know, that manipulative thing about that story and the way that story is often told in those settings, it always makes my skin crawl, because it's like, well, you're taking very susceptible children and you're making them sort of believe that they, trying to like evoke in them the pain that you believe Jesus went through, and then be like, because of that, you have to believe or else. I mean, that's just an awful thing to do. It's tricky, because I totally see the read of it, which is like, believe or your firstborns will die. I guess the way that I always viewed it, because I wasn't in a particularly religious space when I first saw it, is that I looked at it the same way that I would look at like myth.
Like the same way that I would look at like...
Yeah, like a Norse myth or a Greek myth or something, where it's like, yeah, I buy into the reality of the story for the sake of the story, and that, yeah, this is a world where God exists and he can do this. But I kind of like the fact in this film that because I think that that's the level on which you access it if you're not religious, right? Like, I think if you're a religious person, you experience it differently. And I think a lot of religious people would maybe be quite upset about it because of some of the liberties it takes and whatever. But ultimately, I don't know, I think I love the fact that it portrays God as this absolutely terrifying force that isn't really benevolent in the slightest. Like, he's quite scary.
Oh, yeah.
He's quite, he's really that,
He's
like...
super Old Testament.
Super Old Testament, right? And it's like...
Testament.
And what I think makes the film work, ultimately, is the fact that it roots the drama in the characters, like I was sort of saying before. But, when God does turn up, he's not this, like, comforting, good presence that's, like, welcoming you in. Like, he's quite scary the way that, like Zeus was scary in the old Greek myths, or Odin was scary, or whoever else. So I don't know if that sort of created like a bit of a separation for me, but I can totally see that read on it and appreciate that.
You didn't feel like inclined to believe that it was a true story or based on a true story?
I guess because, like I said, not long after I saw this film, I did go to a religious school, and I was young enough to kind of take everything they were saying for granted and be like, oh yeah, God kind of exists. But I wouldn't say that I felt as though the Prince of Egypt had manipulated me or pushed me in that way. That was more kind of coming from the school and everything. I definitely didn't walk out of this film being like, I have to believe in God or else, And then I went and like got a Bible and literally just read the Moses part of it, and I was like, oh, well, that wasn't as good as the film.
I find it really interesting that you found out about Moses essentially through
the
this film.
yeah.
Whereas,
You didn't read the book
I had
first.
a baby's first Bible, and I'm sure that it had the tale of, I had been told the stories of Moses, but I'm pretty sure, because I was surprised in this one when Ramesses' kid dies, I thought that the last plague didn't happen, that he said he let them go beforehand, but I think that's just like maybe at some point I was told a slightly nicer version. But of course, then I also knew about the story of Passover, so I don't know. I find it very strange to have been able to watch you've been able to watch this film without like all the religious connotations that it has, and I think it's a great story, but I can't remove it from like the fact that it's the story of the Hebrews, and it's the story, and it's like obviously Moses goes on to do things like the Ten Commandments, which I was a bit surprised they cut, but at that point they were already at 90 minutes, so maybe
Yeah.
they had plans for a sequel.
Yeah, no, I that's exactly the sort of that was what I was struggling with to sort of get into with the film, is like, which is weird because like obviously viewing it as just like a myth or a piece of fiction, it's like so many other movies are the same sort of thing, and I can buy into that world and be fine. But for some
like
reason
Thor,
with this,
didn't have a problem with
exactly. But with this, it's like I guess where it's like animation, and then it's like, oh, believe in God or this will happen. Then it's. I just found it really difficult to connect with. Like, visually, real nice, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the. I must admit, I wasn't super keen on the style. If we want to sort of go away from just like the presentation of the film, I know they tried to make them look different, so you could tell like who was Hebrew and who wasn't. But I don't know why they had to do that at the cost of foreheads, because they just looked very strange.
There's probably a certain amount of space, apparently.
Like their eyes were just far too far up their faces, and I just found them look really jarring, especially like the mother and then Moses himself at the end. But then like some of them who were slightly round, like his sister, had a much more round face. But it was very. I thought stylistically I didn't like it.
Sure, I mean it's that thing I suppose where because I'm just thinking there on what you were saying as well, Dan, just about like not being able to separate it from the religious side of it as well, and I think like the more I think about it, the more I go like, okay, so like now this brings up this ethical question, right? Because and then think about the animation as well. I go, okay, well I guess I was exactly the right age to be really susceptible to this film, but also young enough and old enough to not be so manipulated into it that I bought into everything about it. Like I was 7 or 8. I was just the right age to be like, I'm really swept up in the story of this, but I'm not so young that I'm going to see this and just be like, this all happened and I have to, believe it or whatever. So I guess like I had just like enough of a beginning of critical thinking that was the case. I always just saw it as fiction, I never saw it as something that I had to subscribe to in any way. But then that does create the question of like, and I just on that, Helen, likewise with the animation, like it never really fazed me because, you just kind of take it for granted as a kid. But now I kind of start to wonder, I'm like, is this a film that would be or could be construed as manipulative or unethical to show to kids, particularly as something that was made on such a massive scale as this big DreamWorks production? I mean, this wasn't some like little faith-based production designed to be shown in churches. Like this was mass entertainment designed to reach as many people as humanly possible. And I personally don't think, because I do believe that propaganda is very, very obvious. I don't think this is propaganda because I think if it was propaganda, they would not have been going to the lengths to develop the characters and the character dramas and those things as well as they were, and to put them as much at the forefront, and to give Ramesses as much sympathy as he gets. Even Seti and the Queen get like grace notes and glimmers of sympathy at the start, and they're monsters. So I don't think it is propaganda, and I don't think that's its intention. But it's an interesting discussion to open up of being like, is this a film you would show your kids?
I think it's also it depends on your background and what you want your kids to believe, which ultimately like parents can say all they want, that they want their children to make up their own minds, but they definitely want them to make up their own minds in line with their values.
See, I wouldn't say that. At least with my experience, the whole your parents want you to believe what they believe. My parents were like the opposite of that. My parents aren't like heavily Christian, but they believe in God. I've had that talk with them before. They're like, we believe in God, but we don't like go to church. We don't really put too much weight into it. But they said like when like I've never been baptized because my mom said like you can work that out when you're older if you want to be baptized or not. But I went to a very Christian school, but not because I'm a Christian or my parents are Christian, but because it was the only school kind of close by that I could go to.
I think it's important. I'm not sure what it's like in Australia, but a lot of our primary schools are Christian schools, especially where I live. Or where we live growing up, where it's a very Christian dominated area. They're almost all your options will be the kind of Christian school or the incredibly Christian Catholic school.
Yeah, because I went to a really Christian school, but my parents were sort of never pushed me to be a Christian or learn about Christianity. And also I grew up like where like we had family friends that were witches, and like Wicca was very normal to me, and a lot of like like I grew up family friend is a white witch, and it's like that was very normal to me growing up, and my parents never made a big deal about they're a witch, they believe in weird stuff. It was like, no, you respect what they believe, and that's what you should do. So all of like the attempts to make me a Christian at school would kind of wash over, because I was like, this is a myth. This is the same as witchcraft to me. Like, you respect it, but you don't have to believe it, even if people want you to. And then I went through that phase of like really being against Christianity, but not because like I was like, I don't want to be a Christian, I'm going to rebel. It was more of like, well, I knew witches and no witch ever wanted me to be a witch, but I knew Christians and they kind of really fought for me to be a Christian, and that I never gelled well with people telling me what to do like that. So when I got to this film, I approached it with the same idea of like, it's Christian myth. Like, it's not, I know the story, but it is myth to me. It's not real. I know it's not.
You know, it's funny because a lot of my primary school education was in Steiner, and a massive thing at Steiner schools is exploring the mythologies of many, many different cultures. So yeah, there's like a Christian component, but you'll spend just as much time looking at like the Norse myths or the Greek myths or whatever. Or you know, we did a huge session on like the Ramayana from the Hindu myths, and all of it I found equally fascinating. So I guess in a lot of ways I approach stories like this the same way I would approach those stories, because I'd kind of been taught reasonably early on, this is a little bit after I saw The Prince of Egypt, but reasonably early on to kind of look at everything critically and take everything in and find the value in every possible belief system. So I never really, I guess I never really looked at it in that very, very Christian context. But, you know, it's really interesting because I'm with you in that I have always struggled with anybody telling me what to do, or anybody, you know, more to the point, telling me what to believe or how I should think about any given issue. Like, I can't stand that. And I remember when I was about 15 or 16, I went through this, like, and it was the closest thing I had to like a rebellious teenage phase. I went through this like really intense atheist phase where like I was at boarding school, and like, you know, I would read The God Delusion in front of the school pastor, who was a really nice bloke, but I just did that because I was like, yeah, this is me rebelling, and like, yeah, screw religion. And I'd like sneak into the library and put the Bibles in the fiction section, run away and be like, yeah, look at me, I'm such a badass. And meanwhile, there's just some librarian with a headache being like, oh my God, this kid thinks he's so clever. Like, there's always some dickhead every year who does this, please stop. But I had this really interesting experience where every summer holidays at my hometown, there was this Christian youth group who would come and run like a youth shelter thing, like a kind of youth hangout space. And the first year they came was sort of me at the height of my most kind of extreme religion hating, and I was doing a summer holidays internship at the local paper, and none of them wanted to go and cover this, so they sent me to do it. And I went along like, you know, scowling and fuming and ready to go in there and like, you know, just be an asshole to everyone basically. And they were just really nice. And I ended up spending a huge amount of that holidays. My friends and I spent a huge amount of that holidays hanging out with these guys, and they were just really friendly, really down to earth, really cool people. It was a great experience. Nobody ever forced anything. Nobody ever even raised religion unless we raised it ourselves. And when we did, it would lead to these like huge in-depth conversations that were basically philosophical discussions about like, well, this is why I believe what I believe. But, you know, with a lot of respect given to me being able to say, well, this is why I believe what I believe. And I never once felt like anybody was trying to force anything. So that was something that really opened my mind and made me go like, okay, well, maybe this isn't the case. But then fast forward to the next year, different group of, you know, young Christian people from the same organization come along, and they were so much worse. Like, the first night they were there, they one by one got up and gave a big speech about like how God changed their life and everything. And at one point, they took a whole bunch of us local teenagers out to this trip down to the local river to go tubing down the river. And I was sitting there talking to this one guy, and he was like asking those questions like, oh, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite book? What's this? What's this? What's this? And as I was wont to do then and am wont to do now, I went on this big speech about my favorite book and why I loved it and why it was special and blah, blah, blah. And he sits there and he's nodding along and he goes, yeah, cool, man. Yeah, yeah. My favorite book is the Bible. and this is why. And I just sat there being like, oh, shut up. Like, I'm, because the thing is, it was like, you're not listening to me. We're not having a conversation. This was some technique that some pastor taught you to try to draw me out so then you could start, telling me about the good word. And that kind of like brought me right back to being like, oh, piss off. But then it was, funnily enough, a friend of mine who was like super, super like, anti all of this stuff, who one day said to me, he was like, the thing you have to remember with those really hardline Christians who might be like trying to push their kids into believing something or trying to push you into believing something or whatever, the people who make you really frustrated and angry and you're just like, just piss off and let me make up my own mind, is that they're not doing it to piss you off or to be a bad person. They're doing it because they genuinely believe they're saving your soul. And that, I think, is where it starts to get really tricky, because to them, it's like life or death stakes. It couldn't be any higher because you're going to hell if they don't convert you somehow. And to them, it's like, and like once I kind of came to understand that, I was like, it's so much more complicated because, I don't have any time for, for Christians who, overtly hates one group or another, because I'm like, well, the number one rule is like love, right? So, like piss off. But when it comes to like hardline Christians who try to convert you, I'm like, I find you frustrating. But at the same time, I guess I have to bear in mind that this does really matter to you, and this is a high stakes thing, and it does make the whole situation really, really complicated. And I guess, if you start, if you want to like go past their motives, you're just like, well, it's the whole system, right? Like convincing them that if they don't repent, they're going to go to hell. And that starts when they're children and when, they're doing what you were talking about, Helena. And then that just passes on and passes on and passes on and creates this thing where it actually ends up shooting themselves in the foot, because it's like, well, the moment you're one of those Jesus freaks, nobody's going to listen to you, are they?
Yeah, that's why I find these sorts of films a little bit insidious, because they really lull you into that false sense of this is going to be a fun kids film with the animation, with the characterization that's going on, which I do think they've done really, really well. And without the context of this being a story that I had bashed into my head over and over again, more so the 10 Commandments, but obviously the Moses stuff does lead up to it. It just, I can't, because this film's so well done, it would be easier to dismiss it if it was really shit and be like, nice try, Christians, like. But instead, I'm like, I actually really enjoyed lots of parts of this film, and it's gorgeous. And like the water animation and the genuine fear of when they get to the Red Sea, and I know it's going to part because you know that bit.
Yeah.
But I really, parts of the Red Sea. Yeah, it might have been mentioned once or twice. I loved the way they animated it because it was so different to how I'd imagined it in my head before. Because I've had this story sort of, floating around in the ether, like Moses parts the Red Sea. In my head, of course, sea was red because quite a literal child. But the height of the water, obviously it makes a lot of sense when I think about it logically. Like, yeah, seas are pretty deep. They're kind of famous for it. But yeah, it was really gorgeously done. And the fact that they still struggle, like they have to get over these, obviously the sea floor isn't flat, and there's this huge effort and this huge toll it takes on them, and they like lose, their carts and things get left behind, and then they then have to watch these soldiers chasing after them, knowing that they're trying to escape and they're leading these soldiers into a trap. And like, yeah, Moses has to make that call of like, yeah, these guys are going to follow us and they're going to die.
Yeah. What
I know that Ramesses gets washed up, but that bit I'm like, okay, yeah. Sure. Sure he did.
What I was wondering is, let's say that Ramesses had let them go, right, and didn't chase after them after. What was their plan when they got to the Red Sea? Because, like, they didn't have boats or anything.
Look, I think that's a, take it up with the Bible kind of question, because, there's a few things that this film is a little bit beholden to, unfortunately, that I don't think you can really blame the filmmakers for, but yes, no, I'm with you. But I also think if you start interrogating the logic of any part of the Bible, it will start falling apart very, very quickly.
Yep.
But it's funny because, like, I guess what I would push back slightly on that argument of it being potentially insidious, and I'm very open to it because it's a reading of the film I hadn't considered before, and it's coming from a perspective and a context I hadn't really applied to it. It actually makes me wonder now if one of the reasons the film hasn't had the staying power outside certain circles that like a Disney film would have or whatever, where it's so ubiquitous and everybody knows it and everybody's seen it and everybody knows the songs. I wonder if that is due to the religious thing. But I also just think I love, and the thing I've come to appreciate more as an adult, is the ambivalence of it, because I think at the end, when they walk out and they sing There Can Be Miracles, and there's that that beautiful Hebrew part where all the children are singing and everything, to me, I've always found that moment so beautiful in terms of the emotions it evokes, because it's not pure celebration. Like, it's partly celebration, but it's celebration as they're walking out of like the ruins of Egypt, and you just see all the broken soldiers like pulling their whatever they called, you know, the things they wear on their heads off and everything, and everything's fallen apart because of the plagues and stuff, and you've seen the children die, and I feel like it kind of makes you sit in the discomfort of the fact that it's like, yeah, okay, like the Egyptians did something really awful, but God's kind of done the exact same thing, and now we're sort of having to see the pain that they've gone through, and it holds that side by side with the relief and the celebration of the Hebrews leaving. And, you know, the moment where Ramesses is like laying his son down, and the film does, you know, it doesn't really build up his son as a character, but it takes the time to show you the kid. He's not just this like faceless idea. Like he's just a little kid. Like he's this like cute little child who loves his dad. And it doesn't, I feel like a lesser film, or a film that was more set on manipulation, wouldn't make those choices. It wouldn't do those things. It would brush that stuff under the carpet and just make it more purely victorious at the end. And that to me is why I think it works divorced from the religious context. But at the same time, I'm now thinking that I know quite a few people who are as passionate about this movie as I am, and none of them come from a religious background. I don't know a single person from a religious background, either in that they were religious then, or grew up in a religious household, or are still religious now, who have the same passion for this film as most of the agnostic or secular people I know who do, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think if I'd been able to approach this film without the subtext, that like the same way, like we approach the other stories, like regardless of what they're based on, like I'd have probably enjoyed it more. I mean, also as a kid, I'd have probably still not enjoyed it because there's no princess. You know, I was very set in my ways about what I liked. But yeah, there were, you know, the songs in it are super catchy, and I loved the animation, especially the like hieroglyphic wall painting scenes.
That bit was really cool. I like that. Yeah,
like with just the sheer horror as he's like realizing what his dad did, and like that click that you might have of realizing that that's why Moses was sent in that basket to save his life, because the Pharaoh was they were going around killing children, and he should have died. Like Moses should have been killed. It really, it's a really good film in that respect, and it's really not like that's the benefit of the animation, is that you can have all these like this sudden change in style that would be really grating and weird. Like if you had something like that in a live action film, if it suddenly, you know, went into like cave painting style or wall painting style, and then, you know, what it does is it shows him like kind of processing and like realizing what has happened and what could have been, and you know what his dad did, and how he can't accept that. And like he's really, you know, he is personifying these slaves because he hadn't before, because, you know, obviously he's a product of his growing up. He doesn't see slaves as people, and then he does, and that's obviously really traumatizing.
Well, yeah, just to realize, you know, that great line that he has to Ramesses, where he's like, no empire should be built on the backs of slaves, which is, you know, very, very pointed given it's an American movie. But it is interesting, kind of like, you know, the perspective of like somebody's kind of eyes opening. I mean, it almost honestly, ironically, makes me think of like the stories you hear about kids leaving the Westboro Baptist Church, right? Like having been brought up in a really, really monstrous doctrine, and then kind of suddenly realizing, or not suddenly, but having the things they've been denying for years slowly eroded to the point where they're just like, I actually can't turn a blind eye to this anymore. I have to walk away from this. And I have to kind of grapple with the guilt of the fact that purely by being born into this family, or in this case, delivered into this family via a reed basket in a river, I'm culpable. You know, I've been made culpable in something that I had no say in or no choice in, and that I didn't understand because I've been effectively indoctrinated. Like it's really interesting, and it remains relevant today, and like in so many environments. So and that's kind of why I think that it does kind of enter the territory of myth or archetype, which a lot of Bible stories do, where it's like it has that resonance where you can apply the themes or the ideas or the conflicts to it to so many situations that are not purely beholden to ancient Egypt, or to biblical stories or whatever. They do continue to resonate in different ways in different environments to the present day, which is chilling, but that is what makes good storytelling, right? That is what makes the great stories that we come back to again and again, is that they have that universal quality that makes you go, well, this is always going to be relevant because these issues are always going to be here, whether they should or shouldn't be. I just want to kind of jump to you for a sec, Dan, if that's okay, because at the very outset of this, you said, your reaction was, yeah, it was fine. You hadn't seen it before. So talk me through, because you didn't see this as a kid, and I presume you didn't have a ton of context for it before this. Apart from the religious side of it, what was your experience of watching this film? Like coming into it from as an adult, because I'm so fascinated by the experience of somebody who didn't have the baseline context of a child's perspective on this.
Yeah, the only other context I had for this was you know the bit where that there was that gif of him where it's like reversed and it's him like shaking his head and then he hugs his dad. Like that's the only thing I'd seen. But so yeah, I don't know why I wasn't expecting like the religious stuff when I went into it. I didn't know what the story was going to be about. But yeah, like going into it with the sort of adult mind frame, I was like, oh cool, it's like, a nice animation movie. I wasn't expecting as many songs, and I don't know why. Like it was just I don't know. I think the problem was how hard I found it to separate the religious stuff from the rest of it. Because at the end of the day, it's a story about a guy who successfully frees a shitload of slaves, right? That's a good thing. But
most people can probably get on board with that, right?
Yeah. But then the way that the way that it's done of like, this one guy has now been told by the thing on fire that he has to save these people. And as much as he tries, it's never actively Moses that actually ends up saving them. As much as he's talking to Ramesses, it's just the plague stuff that actually makes him change his mind. God is the one doing everything, and so that's what leads to them being freed. And I found the juxtaposition between you see all of these like firstborns dying and stuff from after murdering a bunch of lambs, painting their blood on your door so that God doesn't get you. And so going from that scene of like the weird mist going around and all the kids dying, and then it's like, hey, miracles are real, we can have a little sing song. It was so weird.
The tone in the film is super weird, especially when they go from like cuddling lambs to killing lambs. Was like okay. The most challenging part for me wasn't it was the opposite, really, Dan, from that, where it's like, oh, it's not Moses. It's the bits where it is Moses that I'm like, no, it's supposed to be the whole point of faith is that you don't have this proof. And when his stick literally turns into a snake in front of you, it's like, I could have done without that. I feel like that's just far too on the nose. This is real, this is fact. You don't have to like, obviously I'd believe in God if he started doing things like this. The whole point is that it's supposed to be a little bit more nuanced than that. There's a little bit more, like he's Moses is a prophet, and you have to have faith in him, not in his stick.
And his stick that can turn a river red and then bring some
that's
frogs.
I'd push back on that on a couple of fronts. Partly because he's not trying to convince the Hebrews, he's trying to convince Pharaoh, and it doesn't work because, Pharaoh straight away, Ramesses straight away turns to Hotep and Hoy, and they're like, oh, we can make our own snakes, and, it's all smoke and mirrors and whatever. And then, with the blood and the water and everything, like, and to me, that just speaks to, it's denial, right? Like, it's denial from anyone, where it's just kind of like, I'm looking for anything to justify my perspective, which is what Ramesses does. And because his perspective is so entrenched, where it's like, okay, well, I will pretty much cling on to anything that confirms that I am supposed to be here. I'm Pharaoh, I'm the morning, the evening star, all of that stuff. So I didn't mind that so much, because the other thing is that, like, for the Hebrews who Moses frees, I don't think their faith ever really wavers. Like, I don't think they need Moses to walk in there and prove anything to them, because they already still believe, they already, like, believe in God. They just need, they say at the start, like, send a shepherd to shepherd us. Like, Moses' whole role there is to guide them out and lead them out and be the leader and the figurehead, but I don't think he's there to prove anything to them. I think their faith is pretty unshakable, because I think if I understand the story correctly, the whole idea is that this is God rewarding their faith. So that I don't mind, and the fact that the Egyptians don't respond to it, I don't mind either. I think if I can be a screenwriting wanker for just 1 second, and I'm sorry about this, to me, what affects me more, and I do understand that it's like, if you look at like traditional screenwriting, like, you know, ideas where it's like the midpoint of the story is the point where your character goes from reactive to active, and the midpoint would be the burning bush. So it's like, yeah, the first half of the film, Moses is like, you know, reacting to what he's being told and running away and trying to hide and everything, and the burning bush sends him back. But then he doesn't really do a lot, because you are right, Dan, in that God is doing everything. And a lot of that I just kind of forgive, because I'm like, well, you know, you are at a certain point beholden to the story that you're adapting, and there's only sort of so much you can
Only so much
mess with
time.
that.
I wasn't expecting them to get through all of the plagues in a song.
Except it's a great song, and it is an amazing song, and the imagery and everything. But see, that actually comes to what my point is, in that, which is that to me, I fundamentally see it as the story of two brothers. Like, more than I see it as the story of the book of Exodus or a story about God or anything, what emotionally moves me about it and what draws me in and what makes me come back time and time again. And like any good film, everything else works in concert with it, but it is the story of Moses and Ramesses, and it is the story of Moses finally facing up to all the things he looked away from, because presumably he walked past those hieroglyphs a lot as a kid and never really thought about it because he didn't have the means to. But you know, I buy that, because when you're a kid, you know, you don't necessarily look at the troubling things around you. You take them for granted, and it's only when you get a bit older and something comes along to shake your worldview that you go, oh my God, hang on, this is not okay. And to me, the arc of his is him getting to a place where he's like, I am going back and I'm facing up to this, and I am, you know, taking responsibility, and I'm going to, you know, come here and do the right thing. But to do that, the biggest stakes, well, what's at stake for him, or the biggest cost for him, is the fact that it will mean going up against the brother who he loves, who is the most important person in his life, and who he still loves. And it's the fact that he kind of holds the line through all of that I think becomes his arc, more so than him actually doing anything super active in the second half, because you're right, he doesn't really need to. Like, he kind of just rocks up and then God sort of handles it. And his challenge, I've always seen it as, is just holding the line in the face of that. I mean, he says in the song, you know, it's that beautiful line where they do the mini reprise of All I've Ever Wanted, where he says, you know, this was my home, or this pain and devastation, how it tortures me inside, or the innocent who suffer from your stubbornness and pride. Like, you can see in that song that he is tortured, he is being torn up by this, but his role is holding the line in the face of seeing his home falling apart, and seeing his brother hate him, and seeing all of this happen. But that, to me, is what his arc ultimately is, and he does hold through, and he does get out at the end. But what I love about it is that it leaves him with a feeling that's not similar to the feeling I get at the end of Return of the King, which is this really bittersweet conclusion where you just kind of go, well, yeah, they won, and it's happy, and it's great, but Frodo is forever broken by it. You know, he's never gonna, you know, he has that great line where he's like, you know, we set out to save the Shire, and it has been saved, but not for me. He can't go back because he's too changed. And it's not a one-to-one comparison, but that's kind of how I feel at the end. You know, when Moses turns away, it's like, well, he turns away from the water and sort of finally turns away from Ramesses and walks into the future. I'm like, yeah, I feel like there is a catharsis of sorts there, but like any catharsis, it's shot through with the pain of the fact that it's like, it's always going to be complicated by the fact that for this to be achieved, you literally had to be party to the destruction of everything you ever knew and loved. Like, as he says in the song, all I ever wanted. And to me, that's where the film derives its power from. Because again, it's the fact that I can come back to this now as a secular adult and still find that it moves me, ultimately comes down to, I think, the character work, you know? And that doesn't say that the more troubling aspects as pertains to the religious stuff doesn't coexist with that, or doesn't make it a more complicated viewing experience. But I think for me, in the end, that's what is always going to win out.
Yeah, the story of the brothers and him freeing the slaves and stuff is all like, yeah, they're the bits I enjoyed. It was all the God stuff that really just took me out of it.
It's a bit preachy.
Yeah. It is just so impossible for me to imagine this film without that context and without that, I know the before stories, I know the run up, I know the after. Like it's all stuff that I'm so like Old Testament, because Exodus is it book 3?
I do not know.
Like I read the Bible as a kid, and like I never got super far in, but I think I made it to the Moses stories. So it's so hard to like. I like the characterization, but I'm like. I'm struggle to give the screenwriters proper credit for these characters, because I'm like, well, they're taking it from the Bible. This is a thing that has been written down for centuries. Like, how can they take credit for it? But you're right. Like, it is really well done. It is really powerful.
I think that's where I kind of push back, because to me the genius of the screenwriting is that the Moses Ramses relationship isn't in the Bible. Like, it's just Pharaoh. He like for all because that was the biggest thing that jumped out to me when I read this story as a kid. Was that I was like, oh, it's not Ramesses. Like, there is no Ramesses. It's just Pharaoh. Moses brought up with Pharaoh, and then he kills a man, and he runs off, and he comes back, and the Pharaoh there is just referred to as Pharaoh. So, for all anyone knows, it could just be his father. And to me, I think that the genius of this, that the filmmakers have looked at that and said, well, hang on, there's something that hasn't been unpacked here, which is the emotional turmoil of a man being put against his family, which is not in the Bible. Like, it's implicit there in the broad strokes of the story. But the masterstroke of this film is that choice to be like, well, it's not his father he's going up against, it's his brother. Like, if it was his father, then yeah, sure, you get the classic, the son defeats the father, facing up to the sins of the past and everything. But it's way more complicated than that, because it's the brother who he grew up with. It's his peer, it's his equal, it's the person who he shared everything with. And it's that change to the source material, which is kind of quite a small one in some respects, because it doesn't actually change the outcome or the way the story plays out. But to me, it totally changes the texture and the heart of it. And that, to me, is what elevates this. But I say that with full appreciation of the more troubling aspects elsewhere.
I really agree. I think the film humanizes the story a lot more than from what I remember in the Bible, being told about it in the Bible and being read it. But it doesn't just humanize the Moses and Ramsey story. It humanizes everything. Yeah. From what I remember, the plagues in the film are it's pretty quick. It goes through most of them pretty quickly. And that's kind of the same in the Bible. There isn't much time put into the sort of effect and impact of the plagues. It's just kind of said as fact. It's sort of the plagues happened, and then that's it. But in the film, like the one plague that I think is given, the one sort of thing that's given a lot more weight is the firstborn part, because it could have just said, and then we take your firstborn and that's it and move on. But it didn't. It showed you all of these children living normal lives, just sleeping in beds with their families and living normal lives, and they're dead. And it really shows you that. More than just Ramsey's kid, it shows you like all of it. And even when it's discovered that like Ramsey's child is dead and it's the end of it, you hear wailing in the background, you hear screaming and crying. And it's like, and I think it's that point that is like the humanization of this story that I think sets the film apart from the Bible story.
And the bit with the cloth over Ramsey's kid, and he lifts him up, and you can see the child's face outlined in the cloth over him, and he's obviously he's dead, but it's so haunting and so like it does make you really really impassioned about Ramesses and what he's lost for he thinks both people think they're right. And I know that we don't get much characterization of the child, but because he's so similar to the Ramesses that we saw as a child, it doesn't matter. Like, you can see what this child could become, and that that happy sort of doting, like older brother.
You don't need to be given like full backstories for all these
children.
You
don't need that to be sad that a kid has been murdered.
Yeah, but also you don't need to see all of the children grow up. You just need to see them that they're with loving families.
Yeah.
And they're existing and they're happy, and then it's all taken away, and that is like the impact of that scene. Because they could have just skipped it and had the same impact that all the other plagues kind of had. They didn't. They really lent into that one.
So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the comedic side, like the comic relief, and then also like the casting in this film. Because the casting's insane.
Casting's brilliant. Like, I think that made this film, as much as the animation made it, they got the best voice actors in the sort of sphere at the time to do it.
Voice actors, they're all like they're great actors.
Like,
yeah.
But they got them all, and they're all like pretty much all of them are Shakespearean actors.
What I
Yeah,
did find
Ray
really
Fiennes and-
strange, a really strange choice was to have very British Ramesses, very American Californian
Yeah.
Moses.
Yeah, they're all very white, but it was 1998, so
No, it's in like just that you've got like Ramesses has an English accent.
yeah.
Well, it kind of reminds me of
My sister.
it's this weird thing in animation, I think, where one of my favorite one of my favorite recent films is How to Train Your Dragon, and I say recent, it's over 10 years old now. But How to Train Your Dragon, I love How to Train Your Dragon, and I remember reading an interview with the director saying that his dream is that the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, he's like, I don't see it as children's films. He's like, I see it as a trilogy that could sit on the box set, could sit on the shelf comfortably next to your Lord of the Rings set, your Star Wars set, your all of that. And I love those films. I'm like, I think they almost get there, but there's these weird little ticks which I think come down to the animation industry, which is exactly that same thing where it's like, why are all the parents Scottish and all the kids American? It doesn't make any sense, and it's exactly the same in this, where it's like, but then I suppose you could kind of make an argument, and it's a flimsy argument, I grant you that like all the Hebrews are American and all the Egyptians are British. I don't know what that's saying, but then you go, well, then Hotep and Hoi are American as well. So look, I don't know. I think you almost just have to kind of chalk it up to that weird animation thing where there just isn't a ton of logic to why this accent's here and why this accent's here.
You just get the good voices to do it that have the right cadence and the right power, and then you just go, the accent doesn't matter.
But yeah, Voldemort as Ramesses is great.
So that's what I want to talk about this film. I want to talk about a bit of the production.
Oh, okay.
Because the production of this film is interesting, because it was made, from what I can tell, it was a difficult thing to make, and then it came out the other side and didn't do well. But from what I've read, the way they saw this internally, like, this was the project you wanted to work on at DreamWorks at the time. This was the important project that they were doing. So you wanted to be on this project because it meant something. They were doing something. It was more than just a film. It was more than just a kid's animation. And at the same time, they were also making Shrek. And this is a story told by quite a few people that worked on Prince of Egypt. When they were working on Prince of Egypt, if they couldn't keep up, if they couldn't work on it, they were relegated to Shrek. If you didn't do a good job on Prince of Egypt, you were relegated to Shrek. And they called Shrek the Gulag, and they called it being Shreked. Shrek was this, like, it was a childish story. It was full of stupid jokes, and it was edgy, and it was like weird, and it was just a kid's film with some adult humor in it. And at the time, it didn't have Myers working on it. I've forgotten the other actor's name. He passed away before they finished recording, and they re-recorded it, and that was when Shrek was made Scottish. But like, Shrek was the film you didn't want to work on, and Prince of Egypt was the important story, and then Prince of Egypt bombed. Later became like a cult critical love. Like, critics love it, people love it for what it is. And Shrek, the bad film, was one of the biggest most successful films ever, one of the most successful animations ever. And I kind of, it's such a dumb story to come out of. These sort of two very different films were kind of being made side by side, and one was a punishment.
It's so funny because the funniest thing I think about that story, and I'd never heard that before, but it doesn't surprise me at all, because I think it is so often the case where the passion projects don't initially hit big, and it tends to be and look, I've found that in my own writing, where it's like the things that have been the most successful for me tend to be the things that I'm the least passionate about. Whereas, and it's not to say that I'm not passionate about them, because I am. I wouldn't write if I wasn't passionate about it. But I've also found that, like, the things that meant the most to me are the ones that sort of just seem to get a bit ignored. And I think that, whatever you can accuse the Prince of Egypt of in terms of shortcomings or whatever else, you can tell every frame of it is suffused with passion. Like, this was a passion project for the people who made it, and that's very, very obvious. Like, it's made with immense love and immense care, and in some ways, I think it's a shame that it didn't hit the way it did. Hit the way it was intended to. But then at the same time, I kind of go, like, I almost love that about it. Like, I think in some ways it must have changed DreamWorks' trajectory, because they've never since tried something on this scale, but then, or of this intensity or this particular style. But then not a lot had been done of this particular style or intensity or scope before that in animation either. Like, it was an experiment that financially didn't pay off, but over 20 years later, we're still here talking about it, and it still obviously retains a place in the hearts of many, many people. I mean, it's just had its West End musical open up and apparently do really well, which just says that, it obviously has endured and it has sustained, and, it won't ever generate the memes that Shrek, generates. But I think for the people who loved it, the passion that is there for it will probably be, for many, many people, far more intense than something like Shrek ever could be. And that's at least been my experience. And I love Shrek, by the way. I'm certainly not bad-mouthing Shrek. I adore Shrek.
No, they're very, very different films that have very different impacts. And it was, I can't remember if Prince of Egypt actually won an award, but it was definitely nominated.
The standard, I think, because they obviously kicked off anyone who wasn't good enough. The standard of the animation
went to Shrek.
Yeah, is really good. And I mean, if we look at like what happens when that goes wrong, we've got Titan AE as only 2 years later, which is just such an ugly mess of a film because of the bad choices of animation style and the bad use of CG.
I was just going to say, can I just secretly admit that I adore Titan AE? Although, actually, that would have been great. But that said, that's a film I haven't seen since it came out. Like, I watched a bunch when I was a kid. I haven't seen it since. I think you guys have already done an episode of it, unless I'm getting it mixed up with something else.
It's so much uglier than you can possibly remember. You'll be remembering the lovely short part of it that's hand-drawn. The rest of the ugly... Imagine, like, PlayStation 1 graphics, but you dropped your PlayStation 1 and your television.
Fine. Yeah. That one can just endure in my memory.
Yeah. I recommend watching it.
We definitely upset Jamie, who a friend of the pod, who brought that film to our attention. He was so disappointed that it didn't live up to his memory. So yeah, I think keep that one close to your heart and away from your screen.
I'll leave that where it is.
This is a unique podcast where we get to tell people to not watch films because they're bad now, and just remember them good.
Yeah, like Flubber.
Tiny. But yeah, no, I this film absolutely, if it did win an award, it absolutely deserves it for animation and for everything. It's just it's a lot to get through for a film, I think, is the main complaint I have for it. If you're not like sat down to watch it and you're not 100% paying attention, this film feels like it drags.
So,
yeah, we should
Dan,
probably
how would you rate this film? Especially, I want to know before discussion and after discussion, because my rating has definitely changed having talked about it.
Gabe has convinced us all to like this film.
Yes, I'm a secret sleeper agent for the Prince of Egypt. I don't think anybody else is that, but I will wear the badge with pride.
Which is a very specific job and doesn't come up often, I imagine.
Yeah, no, funnily enough, it doesn't. It's a weird one for the resume.
Yeah, I think it's improved a little bit from this, but still my improved score is going to be a 5 commandments out of 10. Because, yeah, like, I can appreciate the animation and, yeah, like, the story of the brothers and the freeing of the slaves and everything. But, yeah, like we've said before, just trying to disconnect the sort of religious aspects of it. You can't. Like, that's the problem. Yeah, I'd give this, 5 out of 10.
Gabe, out of 10, I think we can guess from the past, like, long conversation, we can guess what it is out of 10, but what's your out of 10 for this film?
I'm giving it a big old... well, no, I was going to say 11. I'm not going to say that. No, I will give it a big old 10 very biased plagues out of 10 because I can't... I love this movie too much. And look, the way I see it is I'm just kind of like any film that I can watch over and over and over again and it can still... like get this kind of an emotional reaction out of me and that I can still be this passionate about and I can still find new things in time after time after time. It gets to a point where, ratings out of 10 just become so meaningless because it's like, how do you rate your love affair out of 10, like it's so look, to me it's that because like this film just means so much to me. And honestly, it's just been awesome to get the chance to talk about it because I don't think I would be the person I am today without this movie. I certainly would not be the writer I am today without this movie. I mean, my first book, Boone Shepherd, is a very, very thinly veiled retelling of this story. So, like its impact on me has been immeasurable. And I watched it again just the other night, and it still has that impact on me. And I will watch it again countless times for the rest of my life. And I have no reason to believe at any point it'll wane. So it's a big old 10 for me.
Oh, lovely. I'm going to give this, before talking about it, 3 African animals trying to kill Moses on his way down the Nile. I went into it, I think because I went into it with so much baggage that I couldn't see the forest for the trees with it. I was so, like I found the religious connotation so frustrating. But talking through it and actually talking about the bits of the film that I can appreciate with reflection, it does go up to like a 5. Yeah, 5, because there is so much to like about this film, and I wish I could experience it without my predisposition and my background in Christianity and my background in being and feeling indoctrinated, because it is a great story. Like, it is really, and it's beautifully told, but it's that religious aspect, I just can't separate it. And I wish I could, because there's certain scenes in this, like the relationship between like Moses and Ramesses is so interesting, but I wish I could enjoy it more, I think, is my take from it, especially hearing how much it, how passionate you are about it, makes me really want to like it. And I'm close, but I can't say, hand on my heart, that I do like this film, or that I'll try and watch it again. Maybe in the future, with fresh eyes, I'll try and watch it again more critically and less religiously. But yeah, at the moment, I'm still struggling so much with that.
So it's interesting, because I would give it an 8 out of 10. 8 sheep sacrifices, 8 out of 10, and I think it's really interesting that the two of us that can't separate the religion from the story, it was a difficult film for you guys to get through. But the two of us that did separate it and don't have that connection and can see it as just pure myth, that we liked it so much.
Yeah.
Like it's an 8 because I felt like this film really drags, and it might have been because I wasn't in the mindset to watch it and I was kind of tired. But the animation's brilliant, the story's brilliant, the writing is brilliant, the music is amazing, and but I could completely separate it from myself because I'd never been inside. I've always been on the outside looking in when it came to Christianity and like most religions, respectfully looking in and sort of treating all religions similarly, which is like there's a lot of mythos, there's a lot of story involved. And I just think it's really interesting that it seems to be, if you have a bad experience with Christianity, this film, at least from like what the examples we have here, this film becomes kind of difficult to watch.
Yeah. Definitely. I think it's Christianity ruined the Prince of Egypt film for me.
It's the worst thing they've ever done, really. If you weigh it all up and you go through all the history. But like, look, it's so interesting because again, I think it comes back to the fact that religion wasn't really a factor when I first saw it, so it's like I have to remind myself sometimes, it's a God movie. But so I completely appreciate that side of it without really being able to see it myself, because there's the thing where it's like everybody's got their own bias that is dependent on their life experience and what they bring to the table and everything. And that's why if we didn't have that, you wouldn't have subjective different responses to films. So honestly, it's just kind of fascinating to get the chance to kind of to talk about something I love this much and just hear such different perspectives on it and get some insight into why. And it's definitely making me look at the film a different way, which is hugely valuable. Like, what else could you ask for from something like this? It's like bringing that subjectivity to the table, and sort of, I think the reason you listen to podcasts like this, or you do podcasts like this, is to hear those different perspectives and to hopefully have them inform your own view of the film, which is such a valuable thing.
Yeah, and I think it shows that nostalgia works both ways.
Absolutely.
And context and childhood context is so important for why some of these films hold up for some of us, and why you can gloss over some things and some things don't occur to you until someone else points them out. Because you do get these sort of blinkers.
This one's definitely got the nostalgia, the bad nostalgia of Christianity.
The bad nostalgia of Christianity. I love that.
Well, we've nearly been recording for as long as the movie goes for, so we should probably start wrapping this
up.
It's
been so interesting to have a sort of serious podcast episode as well. This is definitely the most this is the least we've sworn and joked
around.
Yeah.
I just want to say there is one butt joke. There's two butt jokes. There's an upskirt joke and there is a butt joke in this film, which I wasn't expecting, but they're there. So, butts.
That makes it a kid's film. That's
the criteria.
Yep.
Yeah. I have one last question, Gabe. Are you going to go watch this film again now?
Oh yeah, like that's an absolute given. There's no doubt whatsoever that I will watch it countless more times before I will be pushed into my grave grasping at my DVD for Prince of Egypt, which by that point will be so worn out and DVD players won't even exist. But that will be the case.
Yeah, just have it as an implant.
That's right.
Absolutely, just like
on your brain chip
Play
implant.
in front of me at all times.
Every time you think, oh, maybe I'll watch Titan AE now, watch Prince of Egypt
Yeah, watch
instead.
Prince of
Yes.
Yes. That's my big takeaway from tonight.
Well, with that, I have been Dan.
I have been Michael.
And I've been Helena.
And I've been Gabe.
And Gabe, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Go Bergmoser, so Go Bergmoser. And my books are basically in all good bookstores, I hope. So yeah, The Hunted, The Inheritance, True Colours of the White Lie, which has not come out in the UK. I think that's Australia only at the moment. And I've got a couple of things on Audible as well that you can only find there. So if you Google my name, it'll all turn up.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much for being on. It's been great having you as a guest.
Yeah, it's been so interesting.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and so serious.
I did for-
Yeah, sorry.
I feel like I sapped the humour out of these conversations unintentionally.
But yeah, no, it's been great,
But it's
and
so
thank you for
interesting.
giving us so much of your time.
No, that's all right. Thanks for having me. Any chance to talk about this film is fine by me.
Well, you can find this podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Hilton Pod. That's at HILTM Pod. We're on Discord as well. Let us know what you thought of Prince of Egypt. It's been quite an insightful one, I think.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see, like, did other people bring all that baggage with them watching this? Do people remember it fondly? Do they hate it? Yeah, or was it just one you never heard of because it was lost to the ether of time?
It was lost to Shrek.
Yeah.
Shrek.
It got Shrek. We normally sing the theme song and hope it gets cut out and replaced. Sometimes it doesn't. Thanks, Dan.
I adore and respect this movie too much to butcher anything on its soundtrack by trying to sing it on air. So I'm going to just plead the fifth on this one.